Have you ever thought about how a country can change, like, almost overnight? Well, today we're talking about the incredible story of Japan. For over 200 years, it was a nation completely isolated from the rest of the world. And then one single event in the 19th century changed everything.
I mean, really, put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine your entire world has been sealed off for generations, and then one day, these massive ships, bigger than anything you've ever seen, just appear on the horizon, puffing out black smoke. That's exactly what the people of Japan saw in 1853.
And this is where our story really kicks off, with this totally shocking arrival. The Japanese had no idea what these things were, so they gave them a fitting name, the Black Ships. Now, these weren't just any old ships. They were steam-powered, moving without sails, even against the wind. To the Japanese, who had never seen anything like it, they must have looked like some kind of terrifying sea monster. And honestly, that was kind of the point. It was a deliberate show of power. The man in charge, Commodore Perry, wasn't there to make friends. He had a letter from the U.S. president with a very clear demand: open your country for trade or else. And to make sure they took him seriously, he told them he'd be back in a few months with an even bigger fleet to get their answer.
Okay, to really understand why this was such a seismic shock, we need to rewind a bit and look at what Japan was actually like before Perry showed up. For centuries, it was a country that was intentionally and completely locked away.
The official government policy was called Sokoko, and it literally means locked country. This wasn't a casual thing. It was probably one of the strictest isolation policies in all of history, all designed to keep Japan totally separate from any outside influences.
And the rules were incredibly strict. If a foreigner washed up on their shores, they could be executed. If a Japanese person left the country, they were forbidden from ever coming back. The whole point was to basically press pause on Japanese society, to protect it from foreign ideas, new religions, and especially new technology. So who was running the show? Well, it wasn't the emperor. The real power was held by the Tokugawa shogunate. The best way to think of the shogun is as the country's top general, a military dictator. For over 250 years, it was the shoguns who enforced this locked country policy and ruled over a society of samurai warriors. So you've got this isolated, feudal society, and suddenly it's face-to-face with the industrial power of the United States. What you get is this incredibly tense standoff, and it's all because of a massive, massive technology gap. I mean, look at this mismatch. It's almost unbelievable. The Japanese had samurai with swords and some very old muskets. The Americans had steam-powered warships with heavy cannons that could turn a city into rubble from miles away. The Japanese leaders weren't stupid. They knew a fight would be an absolute disaster. And Perry didn't just bring threats. He brought proof. He gave the Japanese officials gifts, like a fully working miniature steam train and a telegraph set. These weren't just nice gestures. This was a demonstration. It was a way of showing the Japanese exactly how far behind they were. It was a quiet way of saying, this is what you're up against. And sure enough, just as he'd promised, Perry came back. Only this time, he had 9 of those black ships with him. Imagine seeing that fleet anchored in your bay. It was overwhelming. The shogunate knew right then and there that resistance was pointless. Their only real option was to negotiate. That negotiation led to the Treaty of Kanagawa, which officially ended Japan's 2 centuries of isolation. It opened up a couple of ports, allowed for some diplomacy, but it's often called an unequal treaty. Why? Because it was basically forced on Japan, and the terms were definitely tilted in America's favor. But here's the twist. Forcing Japan to open didn't just change its relationship with the world. It started a revolution from the inside. The shogun's decision to give in to the foreigners absolutely shattered his authority at home. This became the rallying cry for everyone who was furious with the shogun. A lot of powerful samurai lords felt the government had shown incredible weakness and had basically dishonored the entire nation. They wanted to kick out the foreigners, who they called barbarians, and bring pride back to Japan. All that anger eventually boiled over into a full-blown civil war. Now, for hundreds of years, the emperor had just been a figurehead, a symbol with no real power. But now, all the shogun's enemies started to rally around the emperor. They saw him as the true leader of a strong, unified Japan. The country was literally tearing itself apart. This whole conflict came to a head in 1868 with something called the Meiji Restoration. The last shogun was finally overthrown, and power was officially handed back to the young Emperor Meiji. And this wasn't just a change of leaders. This was the end of 700 years of military rule. It was the end of feudal Japan. And what happened next is honestly one of the most remarkable and rapid transformations in world history. With the emperor back in charge, Japan basically went on a mission to modernize as fast as humanly possible. Just look at how fast all of this happened. In just a few decades, Japan went from a medieval society of samurai to a modern industrial powerhouse. They built their first railroad just 4 years after the Restoration. A little over 20 years later, they had a modern constitution. And by 1905, they did something nobody thought was possible. They defeated a major European power, Russia, in a war. To pull this off, they completely remade their society from the ground up. They built factories, strung telegraph lines across the country, started a public school system for everyone, and completely got rid of the old class system. The age of the samurai was officially over, replaced by a modern army and navy. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? The arrival of those black ships set off a chain reaction that didn't just change Japan, it completely reshaped the balance of power across the entire world. By modernizing so quickly, Japan managed to avoid being colonized by the West, which happened to so many other countries in Asia. But it didn't just defend itself, it became a colonizer. Japan went on to build its own empire, defeating its neighbors and becoming a huge military and economic force. And that brings us to the final, really complicated question. How are we supposed to look back on this? Was Perry a hero who brought progress to a nation that was stuck in the past? Or was he an imperialist who used military threats to force a country to change against its will? Honestly, it's a really tough question, and it's one that people still debate to this day.